dancing.
I'm a dancing, and we're live. Just so you know, we are on the air.
My
Josh
bad. I didn't
King.
hear it. Sorry.
Welcome to today's episode of EST,
I
the
forgot how it
podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. I am your host, Sam Rayner, and my co-host is
Josh King, who totally forgot how to start the show. My whole brain just blanked. So,
no.
yeah,
You
thank
know
you
what
so
I
much
did?
for.
I hit record. I hit record when I saw you looking away, and I thought that you would turn back just in time to catch the 2 or the 1 on the countdown, but you didn't.
I didn't. I turned back, and you're just dancing, and so I was
know.
like, okay, all right, let's start here. 3. Hey, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and I'm going to leave that in the intro. So you're going to get 2 intros on this. I'm going to tell the editor not to edit it out.
Hey, we all mess up on things, but yeah. So let's not mess up further by telling them who our sponsor is.
Yeah, we've had a great sponsor for well over a year now. Church Teams is the church management software company for you, and I know that because I know them well. In fact, Josh, we've got Boyd Pelly coming on the show to talk about technology here in a few episodes. So stay on the lookout for that, because Boyd's really, really good. He's one of the co-founders of Church Teams. We love having him on the show. But you need to call them. You need to reach out to them. est.church is where you need to go to get their free trial run. So there's no risk. If you're just like, hey, you guys been talking about this, I know I need some, help in this area. Just give them a shout out. Tell them we sent you. They will set you up with a free trial run. Go to est.church. That's a great place to get all of this. And I am sure that they have a solution for you, whether it be texting, whether it be check-in, whether it be, your database, connection cards. They just digital connection cards. They do it all. So yeah, Church Teams, love them. You will love them too. And I'm sure they've got a price point that will be very appealing to you. So est.church to get their offer.
Yep. Okay. So I had this idea because, I've taken a new church and I'm leading this new church. And one of the things that happens that I feel like this is just a natural thing that I do, but I do know that there's studies out there and people that think through this much better than I do. But it's the words that we use and the language that we use in order to talk about us, what we believe, our campus, those sort of things. They all kind of help with setting culture. So there's 2 thoughts mainly with this I want to chat about this morning or right now with you, Sam, is the one is how our vocabulary will set culture. The other way that how vocabulary or the words we use may actually help you as you are discerning who's with you and who is not with you. All right. So here's the 3 categories that we could talk about. We could talk about our facilities, our rhythms, and our theology or our practices. I think we should jump on facilities first. It's a pretty easy one to tackle. And we can all talk about a million different examples of this. But I want to start with facilities because our previous episode, we actually talked about how established church structures might actually be hindering the growth of your church. So you'll want to jump back and listen to that episode because we talked about the actual structure. Now we're talking about what we call it. So Sam, tell me, how many times have you been in a situation like this where people in the church, some of them refer to it as the worship center, others call it the sanctuary, some might call it the chapel. I was in a church one time and there was a guy who called it the tabernacle. Those are different languages with different cultures, right? What do you guys refer to it as?
We call it the sanctuary or the worship center.
Okay.
We don't really have a term that is locked in. Perhaps we should, because you're going to give some advice to help us out there. But I will say I've got a pet peeve. Can I share my pet peeve?
Yeah, please do.
And this is for any of my church members that are listening. Yes, I know Miss Margaret's listening, but she listens very carefully and she's very kind and she doesn't get on my nerves at all. But this one's my pet peeve. This is okay. You ready? WBBC. Yeah. I can't stand it. I can't stand WBBC.
The initials.
West Bradenton Baptist Church. I have tried and tried and tried. Say stop with the WBBC. One, it sounds like BB. British Broadcasting Corporation. It sounds like that, or
Okay.
radio. It sounds like,
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
it actually is a radio station, WBBC. So,
Probably, yeah.
and I bet I know that I feel too strongly about this, but we adopted. So this is what we did. We adopted the lingo West B,
Right,
short for
and that's how
West
I know it, West B, yeah.
Bradenton. Yeah, and
Mhm.
most people do that, but every now and then, it's usually somebody on staff. Actually, it's not
Yeah,
really my members; it's more the staff. Like,
yeah.
yeah, hey, WBBC. Like, no, no, stop saying that. No, and
Mhm.
and, and nobody cares but me. It's
Well, I
just
actually
my
think
personal pet peeve.
okay, before we end the show, I'm going to tell a similar story, which I didn't know you were going to share that story, and you don't know the story I'm going to share, where I really do feel like this is one of the genesis of this conversation, and why I think what you're talking about right there is a key determiner for a smart or a savvy leader to determine based on the vocabulary, whether or not people are fighting the culture or buying into the culture. And I think these are some just analogies or some helpful stories. But let's talk about facilities. We talked about the worship center, fellowship center. Some other ideas might be words like atrium or fellowship hall. One of the funny stories, my kids, when they were young, the area in our house, when you open the door and there's just this like I don't know. It's just the greeting area. It's just the front room. They one of them referred to it as the lobby, and our dining room as the fellowship hall. That's that's how you
Those are
know
preacher's kids.
those are
Those are
preachers.
preacher's kids.
Yeah, he called it the lobby and the fellowship hall, and he was dead serious. And so
That's
there's
awesome.
some language there. I think lobby is a fine word. I do think atrium. That's a word that's used a lot here at my new church and it's not a bad word. I'm not saying it's a bad word. I am trying to encourage people not to refer to things as atrium because it's not a word that is commonly used outside of church culture. So if we're wanting to be welcoming to people and we tell them, hey, I hope that you can come to my church worship service, I'll meet you in the atrium, they may not know what you're talking about. So our campus has two atriums, two lobbies. One's under a big steeple, one's under a small steeple. And so we've actually adopted the language to just call it big steeple or small steeple. I'll meet you at big steeple. I'll meet you under little steeple, whatever you want to call it, but that's what we call those areas now. And so you can see that just by the use of language and teaching people, we're trying to use language with the outsider in mind. That's what we're trying to do. Now, you and I, though, we have an example of how this might be taken too far, using language with the outsider in mind. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about Elevation Church
We are
and
talking about elevation.
Their Easter
Yeah,
debacle, right? Is that I'm assuming.
that's exactly right. And now, listen, you and I are big fans of let the local church decide. The local churches, we're big fans of autonomy, and so elevation is more than allowed to decide what they're going to do. But what we're talking about here is that they
Nor do they
decided
care what we think.
I bet they don't listen to the show. But I don't want to have a spirit of criticism here, and that's not what we're trying to do here. We're actually let's debate this. Let's talk about this. In their pre-Easter publications, it came out that their social media, I believe that I'm getting these details right. Their social media director essentially said, we're not going to use words like blood, resurrection, death, those kind of things, because they may turn people off or, be obstacles to the outsider. Okay, that's, in my opinion, humbly, I think that's silly. I think that's ridiculous. There are certain elements to our story and to our faith that are just intrinsic. Whether or not you call the lobby the atrium, that's not
Not a
intrinsic.
theological issue.
It's not a theological issue, but it's also not even just it's not a practical issue to our faith. The death of Christ and the resurrection at the time that we call Easter, those are, I mean, if that turns you off, then it's an offense that needs to be offended. It needs something that needs to make you think, right? Or am I crazy on that one?
No, you're not crazy. I think I appreciate the spirit of what Elevation
Right.
was trying to do, not
Agreed.
the execution of what they did.
Yeah.
And it's just another case of someone who probably got out there and anything that anybody. elevation's a bit of a target. Let's just say that, right?
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
they're easy, and we're talking about them because everybody talks about them, and you know what? That's just part of us using a large church as an example, and everybody does it, and they're used to it, and they're big boys and big girls, and they can take it. So I think
Hmm.
I got the spirit of what they were trying to do, and honestly, if they could take it back, they probably would. Although I haven't talked to any of them. But yeah, it was a mistake. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, when you're talking about words that change culture, you need to be careful about things like confusing people. Like, don't call it an
Mm,
atrium if it's a commons area. Don't call it don't call something that it's not, or something that's confusing. But then, you need to be upfront about who you are, what you believe, so that people who come don't feel like it's a bait and switch.
mm,
So, somebody shows up and it's like, well, okay, this is not what I thought it was. So that's not the reaction that you want from people, unless it's a positive thing. Like, wow,
yeah.
your church is a whole lot better than I thought it was. That's a good
Yeah.
thing. But you don't want people to be caught in a bait and switch.
Yeah.
And again, I think elevation, it's a great example. And it's one that got a lot of press. And there were people that just took some unnecessary, they took some unnecessary criticism on it, certainly. Just
Right.
some angry people. But yeah, I do think generally it's a mistake to discount what you believe. A
Mm,
lot of churches end up being large churches that want to be broadly appealing, try to be atheological. And, it's like, hey, we're a church, we believe in Jesus, but we just don't make a big deal out of theology. I think that's a mistake.
yeah.
I'm a big tent Baptist, and I don't mind being big tent, but there are still some like non-negotiables that we have that we're pretty upfront about as a Baptist church.
Yeah, I think there's a difference in being atheological, just cutting all the theology out of our language, and being clearer with our theology. So, we use the word pray a lot. Pray is a very basic word. I think that nearly all English speakers sort of get the idea of what you're talking about there. However, I would argue that a lot of people think that prayer has some sort of they would liken it much more to a magic spell or a particular pattern of language than they would to a conversation with another person. And so there are times when I have been leading large groups through a gospel presentation, and I say, so at this part, I just want you within your mind to speak to God. Just speak to him and communicate these thoughts and these feelings. I am intentionally not using the word prayer in that one because a lot of times when I'm talking to people and there's like, I don't know how to pray, what they later on will confess to me is they just don't know all the words to our Father, or they don't know all the words to the rhyming prayer. And so they're thinking it's much more like a Harry Potter situation than it is like what you and I are doing at this point. So I think I don't want to stray away from the idea of our theology. Be clear in your theology. Just don't, I don't know, don't be atheological. I love what you said there.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous, and it's misleading.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying elevation is dangerous and misleading. Maybe some of our
No.
listeners think they are, but I'm just
I bet they
saying
do.
for churches in general to be atheological is dangerous and misleading. It ends up being a bit of a bait and switch. And honestly, people, you can go to a church like that, and you can be there for like 2-3 years and not even know like what they really believe, and that's a
Mhm.
problem.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a real problem.
We
But I do think established churches are just as guilty on the other side,
right.
using lingo that is off-putting or confusing or just downright anachronistic, that doesn't make sense to people
Yeah.
today.
Y
It's rooted in a lot of traditions, and I like traditions. But when traditions get in the way of reaching people, you need to get rid of those traditions.
Yeah. Yeah, we've kind of moved from facilities to theology, and I wanna talk about that specifically, theology and practice. But facilities, a couple of other illustrations there is, and I'll give you one here. We were setting up sort of a coffee area in our big steeple, in the big steeple area of our church here, and somebody had, and I think it was a great idea. They were like, "I've got these lettering, can we put coffee right over here against this wall, and it'll be really kinda cool," and I thought it was a great idea. But the only reason I pushed back on labeling that, it's like sort of a cutout area in the lobby there. I said, let's not call it coffee because we do a lot of concerts. We're the largest building, the largest what do you call it, auditorium in the city. And so we do a lot of concerts, and that on concert nights are used for ticket call. So you don't want to have everybody go pick up their tickets at coffee, right? So communicating in a way that's more neutral is helpful. So now switching over to theology, I think this is a massive debate with, titles of people. There are people that um I've seen it like the adoration pastor or the fellowship director. It's just like I don't think you're communicating what you think you're communicating, And so there's that. The title pastor, minister, they have theological implications. I think you need to think through that as a church and just be consistent with it. It doesn't make any sense to me to give one minister and the other one director without substantive reasons behind it that you're not actually trying to communicate. Um, I think
Josh, I
office
think you
titles,
should change your title to
yeah.
Chief Dreamer and Visionary.
I mean, we've seen churches do that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Oh
what they
yeah.
do, and ancient Jewish communicator or teacher communicator. It's like, bro, you're just trying too hard. So just call yourself a pastor. That's what you are. The use of the words like sacrament, Lord's Supper, Eucharist, communion. I've seen churches use all of those words as if they're synonyms. I get that they are similar in their meanings, but they're also theological in their meaning. So you can't just rip off some graphic online that says Eucharist and then use it at your little Southern Baptist church because it's not meaning the same thing. And so,
No, it's not. It's definitely not. But those are honestly, I find words can also be teaching moments. So you
yes.
can take a
Uh-huh.
word in a faith tradition, like in our Baptist world, Eucharist is not a familiar term.
Right.
But you can take that word and say, other faith traditions, when they say it, here's what it means, here's what we
Mm-hmm.
believe. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that in that way, now you're taking a word that is not familiar, or maybe people have heard it but don't know what it means,
Mm-hmm.
and putting some meaning to it. And even
Yeah.
if you disagree, even if you're like, I don't quite line up with, say the Lutherans on communion,
Mm-hmm.
or the Catholics on the sacraments,
Mm-hmm.
you can still take those words and use them as teaching moments and actually build bridges to people who may have backgrounds in those faith traditions by saying,
Yep.
and being fair. So you're not using the words as a weapon, you're using the words as a bridge. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really important when you're communicating. I don't like the weaponization of definitions.
Yeah.
And I think it happens a lot on Twitter, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's
Sure.
just where it happens. Where people take words, they weaponize them, and they twist them to mean something different.
Mm.
And I don't think that's helpful to anybody. And I don't like it when churches do that too.
Yeah. I'll give you another example that we're doing here that is right in line with what you're saying there, Sam. We we had a tradition here where, like many Baptist churches, if you wanted to join the church, you walk down the aisle and you fill out a card, and it was one of the ways that that could happen here. And then you joined. You joined the church. That's how you join the church. Well, um, I'm a little more reticent to do that, and so I'm totally fine with you want to walk down the aisle. I'm totally cool with you want to take, fill out the card. But what I stopped doing and helped the staff to see here, and even taught in classes, this is why we're changing this language, and I even explained it to the whole church. I no longer say, "Hey, church, this is Sam and Aaron, and they're joining the church. Would y'all celebrate that?" Now I am intentionally using language of, "Church, let's celebrate today. Sam, Aaron, and their children are taking steps towards membership. I'm going to have a conversation with them this week, and I'm happy that they're doing, which I'll celebrate that." Everybody celebrates it, but they know taking steps towards membership means it's similar to the old practice, but it's slightly different. Our pastor now is going to make sure that all of these people have accepted Christ, that they have been baptized in line with our theology and our practice here, and that they're good with being a Baptist because we're a Baptist church. And so I'm making sure that all of that's in line. Then I let the church know, okay, they have officially joined. So what you're saying there and what I'm saying there is just tweaking the language helps. I know a lot of younger pastors that hate that whole walk down the aisle and fill out a card thing. I'm fine with it. I don't really care. You come down, you fill out the card. That's fine with me. I just don't automatically becoming a member of the church, a voting member of my congregational church. That's where I have a little bit of an issue. So that's what I want to clarify. And that's where language and culture can really step in and help set some lines. And everybody's okay with it.
And what's odd is, we are completely different contexts because walking the aisle and joining the church is a foreign concept in
Mm-hmm.
my neck of the woods here,
Right.
particularly at my church. I can't tell you the last time. It's been years. It has been. I mean, I've been at the church 9 years. Goodness,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably happened once or twice in 9 years where someone walked down the aisle at the end of the service and said, "Hey, I want to join the church."
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't happen because we have so many people from different backgrounds.
Yep.
Only about 30% of our church has a Baptist background, and
Mm-hmm.
70% come from other faith traditions.
Mm-hmm.
So words actually end up being really important at West
Yeah,
Bradenton
exactly.
because people, when you say sacrament, well, there's a third of the congregation that grew up Catholic. That means something completely different to them than perhaps what you mean when you say it.
Oh, it
Um,
means 6 other completely different things as well, and it's not just that one that you're referring to as a Baptist. Yeah,
Yeah, and I have to sometimes explain autonomy. I have to
right?
explain, congregational government. I
Mhm.
have to explain pastor versus say elder.
Or saint
Although I,
or
I I
father,
know
yeah.
poimen, presbyteros, episcopos, all descriptors for the same office. I get that, but not everyone understands that. Sometimes people hear elder, they think something different, and I have to walk through why I'm not Father Sam. I'm Pastor Sam, but I find those moments very positive, very enriching, very
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
Um, you should not be offended at
No.
all
Mm-mm.
because almost everyone is just looking to learn, or they're
Mhm.
curious, or they just need something cleared
Yeah.
up. Um, so language, yeah, language is extraordinarily important in the church, and I do think churches that
Yeah.
downplay it to the point to where it becomes meaningless, using elevation as an example, and that may be a bit harsh to say about them, but where you're downplaying language to where you're watering down theology. Let me say it that way.
Mhm.
I think that gets you into a place where it's just not helpful to
Yeah.
people
Yeah,
at
so
all.
yeah, we've talked about facilities, we've talked about theology practice. Another one, this is just real easy to think through, is just what do you call it? Is it small groups or Sunday school or ABF or I mean,
Oh
all of
goodness.
them are great. All I'm saying is think through it and then be consistent with it. And
We've
make
had
sure
47 different names for our groups. We finally landed on life groups, and everyone still to this day and it's not their fault because the
mm,
church has had, I don't know how many different names over the last 20 years for these things. And so people are like Sunday school, small groups, family groups, community groups, life groups. What is it again? Like, and it's
yeah,
just like,
yeah.
okay, I just tell people with this one, I say, if you're in one, you can call it whatever you want. For those who aren't in one, it's life
Yeah.
groups. But if you're in one, you can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, and you got to get the staff and the leadership on board if you're going to switch something like that. All I'm saying is call it something. I like life groups. I don't even mind Sunday school. My preference is small group. I like calling it small group. I in fact I love refer. I like on campus small group. That's what I call them. I want you to join an on campus small group because that obviously is meaning something. There, even when I say that, right now, all of our listeners know when I'm saying on campus small group, I am communicating a mission and a strategy intentionally. In a, I'm not talking about home groups, and I'm not talking necessarily about a teacher style gathering. So that's why that helps. Um, all I would say is just make it something that sounds. I know I've told you the story before where I was at a church and they just kept referring to ABFs and ABF and ABF. They were interviewing me to pastor, and I was like, I'm sorry, what are y'all talking about? I have no idea what you're, and they're like, oh, adult Bible fellowships. And I was like, okay. Yeah, so small groups. And they're like, right. And I was like, okay. And I noticed on their signage, even in their publicity, it invited people to ABF or median adult ABFs down that hall. Nobody knows what that is. Stop calling it that if you can't communicate it. At least on the signs, put adult Bible fellowship, rooms or something. Um, Oh, and that reminds me, don't call things classes unless it's a class. Don't call it a class. People don't want to go to school. That's why they're at church. So stop calling things classes. So that's going okay. So I've got this. I told you I was going to talk about your pet peeve, and I don't think you're wrong. My previous church, when I got there, it was known as 2BC. All right, it's the Second Baptist Church. We started calling it Second, and there was reasons for
So
that.
2 years before Jesus was born.
Well, okay, so that's one way to understand it. Yeah. But it was just kind of their nickname. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that nickname. It was culturally different and it didn't communicate what they thought it communicated. It's a little outdated to mix the numerals with the lettering. So we went with one that
It is
still
kind of
mixes the
90s.
numeral.
That's like a 90s thing to do.
It is. It was a little bit of like a '90s youth groupy kind of cool thing. So we updated it and called it Second. And we went with the English language, 2ND. That's how you would go Second Street or Second anything else. Well, the entire time I was there for 5 years. There was still a group of people that would intentionally call it 2BC, just refuse to call it Second, and would not. And in fact, there were times where they would edit documents and take out 2ND and put 2BC in it. And there was just this underground thing. And that group, at first, I just thought, well, old habits die hard, right? And that's true. And that's something when you're changing vocabulary, don't get upset, like Sam said, because they keep calling it, the tabernacle, and I'm trying to call it the worship center. Don't get so upset about that. But that at first I was like, old habits die hard. Then I started to think, this is strange that we're like 3-4 years in and we're still doing this. It's a little strange. But what I came to find out through hindsight, and hindsight's always 2020, that group was against the culture I was trying to establish anyways. They were fighting all the changes in the first place. So what I see now in hindsight, I am now trying to apply to my leadership when you're introducing vocabulary. And this isn't across the board. Sometimes it's just that's why your senior adults are still going to call it Sunday school until the day they die. It's just an old habit. It's the way they see it. Don't get upset about that. There is that old habits die hard. There is just a familiarity, but you need to be attentive because there will be times where you can see that the vocabulary is actually showing you more. The vocabulary, the words that just as much as we believe that the words that we're establishing as leaders are building culture, the words that people use are revealing culture, or revealing their disrespect towards you or towards leadership, towards their own self-inflated view of themselves. Those kind of things. You can see that in the language that they're using. So I would encourage leaders, especially if you're establishing churches, to just listen to how people are using their language. Now, you and I both gave illustrations that I don't think the people calling WBBC, I don't think they're like, down with Sam.
No,
That's not
because
the
one of the
case.
previous pastors did it for like 20 years.
That's exactly right. So that's something that you just got to kind of listen to and have some discernment with it. But I am starting to see, I can tell if people are buying into culture by the vocabulary that they're using. And that's helpful for me, whether or not they're going to be friend or foe or helpful, or just they just need some more help in learning the new language. So it's just a key.
Yeah, and I would just say, learn from my example here. Be careful with your own pet peeves. Like I don't. I've just had to WBBC. It grates me, but that's my problem. That's not.
Mm-hmm.
That's not. Other people. Most people don't care, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are listening to this going, actually, WBBC is better than West B. I don't know. But it just grates me. But I have to pull myself back from myself and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is a me thing. This is my preference. And
Right.
I can't impose a personal preference as the leader on my church. I really have to pull back and say, what's best for the church? And,
Yeah.
I still think West B is a good way to go. And just about everybody's adopted it. Every now and then somebody will slip out with Sunday school or WBBC
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. It's a harmless thing. It's just like you said, it's an old habit. But before you go and change things, ask yourself, is this my preference that I'm trying to impose, or is this
Mm-hmm.
really what's best for the church?
Yeah. I totally agree. and I'm adding to that. I don't think everybody that's not using the new vocabulary is against change or culture. I just think that over time, you can hear people's intents and their culture through the vocabulary that they're using. And that's why it's so important to establish vocabulary. It will help you. You should be more consistent. But that's the time we have. And I do appreciate you guys listening. Make sure that you're clicking on Twitter and letting other people know about the show. We would love to hear the odd vocabulary that your church uses. Do you call the room something weird? Do you have a weird designation for something? We'd love to hear that. Share that on Twitter, and we'll catch you next week.
Upward Sports equips churches to run self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. Whether you're a sports fanatic or on staff at a church, Upward Sports will give you all the tools you need to run a first-class sports ministry that allows you to reach families in your community. Upward Sports offers basketball, soccer, flag football, cheerleading, volleyball, baseball, and softball through league and camp offerings. At Upward Sports, we want to help your church make a difference and give you increased opportunities to share the gospel. Learn more today at upward.org/churchanswers.